Good day to everyone. I'm Sharan and I will be your moderator for today's webinar. On behalf of Beroe, I would like to welcome you all for the third webinar from Beroe Insights for this quarter and year 2014. So, in today's webinar, we will have our presenters discuss and analyze how seasonal events and its related demand could impact contract packaging. So, before we move ahead with the presentation, I have some general set of instruction as always. Please note all attendees will be placed on mute, and during the course of the presentation, if you have any questions, you will find a box on the right hand side which is indicated in the red. I request you to type your questions and hit the send button, and as we progress with the presentation, I will ensure to take a note of the high frequency questions and will post it to the presenter at the end of the session. If you are experiencing any connection issues, I request you to close the window and try connecting back with the link that was provided in the invite. And in case if you have any other issues and you're still not able to connect, I would request you to drop a quick email to Puneet at puneet.ramal@beroe-inc.com, and you will find this email ID in the invite that's been sent across to you. So moving on, let me quickly introduce the presenters, the speakers for today. We have Abhiraj. He's a lead analyst with the packaging domain at Beroe. He has a rich expertise in working on several rigid packaging areas like cosmetic packaging, child-resistant packaging, packaging printing, contract manufacturing, and other related areas. He has worked on several projects for some of the leading FMCG, FBT, and pharmaceutical companies across the globe. He has also authored several research articles and white papers, and just to quote a few, like parental packaging, raw material substitution and procurement impact, serialization, aiding the fight against counterfeit drugs, and many more. The next presenter we have for today's webinar is Ishpreet. She's a senior research analyst at Beroe. She specializes in tracking various flexible packaging formats in FMCG space. She has worked on multiple projects for some of the top Fortune 500 clients involving categories such as pouches, sachets, bags, laminates, and related categories. She's also published an article in one of the renowned international magazines called the Flexi Pack Mag. So, without further ado, let me pass on the presentation to the speakers of today.
Hello everyone. Welcome to the webinar on Best Practices in Demand-Driven Contract Packaging, peak versus weak seasons. Contract packaging plays a critical role in the supply chain as it allows buyers to meet consumer demand and to retain customers. It becomes especially important during peak seasons as there is a big surge in volumes, and assuring that the product reaches its destination on time at a reasonable cost becomes necessary. Today, we're going to discuss the situations or scenarios in which contract packaging is most crucial and what are the key pain points that any buyer or supplier of contract packaging will face during peak seasons such as Christmas, New Year's, or major sports events such as World Cups or Olympics. Further on, we'll discuss how the industry incorporates contract packaging into their product distribution strategies. Finally, we'll also discuss what the industry is doing in this space of contract packaging with the help of case studies. So let us understand what is contract packaging in context to today's webinar. Contract packaging is a service provided by third-party companies to brand owners with regards to packaging of products and distribution of the same. The service is also known in the industry as co-packing or fulfillment services, which generally happen at the tail end of the packaging lifecycle. Did you know, and what I state here is a fact, that some of the major consumer packaged goods companies spend nearly $1 billion for the right contract packaging materials and service procurement? Well, If that didn't convince you about the seriousness of the issue at hand, let me put forward some statistics which will exactly do so. The best way to do this would be through tracking the retail sales or spend patterns during peak periods such as global sports events or seasonal festivities. Retail industry is an industry where contract packaging will be most required, and hence we would be tracking the demand through this industry. What we have in this representation is a spurt in consumer spending in retail industry during mega sports events such as the Beijing Olympics 2008, which saw a spike of visa spending for retail of 11%. Vancouver Olympics 2010, which saw a spike in visa spending for retail of 13%. And the 2010 FIFA World Cup in South Africa, which saw a huge spike of 22% for the same statistic. Ishpreet, I understand you have some interesting facts to share.
Absolutely, Abhiraj. In fact, we have another interesting data point that I would like to share. These would be South Africa's retail sales statistics across 2009 and 2010. We can clearly see a demand spurt from November 2009 to December 2009 owing to the Christmas season. If you notice, the months of August, September and October across 2009 have steady demand growth followed by the Christmas spurt of almost 30%. Similarly, the time of the soccer fever in South Africa saw a demand wave from the month of May to the month of July. As you may have noticed, this increase in demand is not similar to the 30% demand spike seen during Christmas 2009. The reason for this would be that demand hike is a wave spread across a period of 3 to 4 months, which accounts for all the promotional activities before and during the Football World Cup. Even though a clear spike is not visible, these demand spurts should not be underestimated. Well, I think that these statistics brings us to the purpose of our discussion today. That would be demand variability and how this could have serious consequences on smooth functioning of contract packaging activities during the peak season. Could you share your views on this, Abhiraj?
You're right, Ishpreet. Sudden spurts in demand and the need to manage the same from a packaging standpoint is a serious concern. To understand this better, let us see how contract packaging is incorporated by major CPG players when it comes to packaging procurement strategies. The best way to do this will be through a case-by-case analysis. In an industry where service lead times and service customization are sought ardently, contract packaging is deemed to be a leverage category, where the products and its packaging are fairly standard. At this point, Ishpreet, what's your thought about the underlying market conditions for contract packaging, which falls in this category?
Well, Abhiraj, I think that the market under focus would be established markets, where the demand is dependent on end-use areas. An example of this could be baby and feminine care products for large CPG companies. Leverage category would be one of the major focus areas of large FMCG companies where they look towards constantly innovating their packaging requirements. The contract packaging requirements here would thus be optional, varying on requirements. Moving on, we have the second quadrant where customization is low with longer lead times, and this would be the non-critical category. These would have established demands with standard packaging requirements that an FMCG firm does not much focus upon. Considering this, Abhiraj, how do you think the contract packaging requirements would vary with respect to the market?
When it comes to markets for the contract packaging, which falls in this category, they tend to be established, where demand is stable throughout the year. A perfect example for this would be ancillary products or promotional items that brand owners give away so as to improve sales and increase customer retention. Contract packaging in this case becomes optional, and the companies have the flexibility to manage this internally or outsource depending upon their facility's capability. However, there are scenarios where your contract packaging decision is not a can-have, rather a must-have. This is the strategic category. An example for this particular scenario would be when companies are trying for new market entry or aiming to increase sales in emerging regions such as Brazil, China, India. Ishpreet, your thoughts about this particular scenario?
Like you explained, Abhiraj, this category stems from market entry into nascent markets, and therefore requirements for contract packaging organization here would be high. The major reason for this would be the need to understand consumer dynamics and demand to develop an internal strategy. Moving on to our discussion for the day, the bottleneck category. This category is where high volume year-end holiday seasons like Christmas or major festivals and sport events like Olympics would fall under. An interesting difference between the two categories we just discussed would be where on one hand, strategic category has demand uncertainty, a bottleneck category would have demand variability. Abhiraj, could you tell us about the contract packaging requirements for this category?
Adding to what you said, markets in this category would require customized services, as the approach that buyers take here would be driven by customer demand, and it will be seasonal or event specific, sometimes also known as peak seasons. Contract packaging for this case becomes a necessity and may act as a bottleneck if not dealt properly. It is this category that will be your focus for this webinar. Now that we have understood the situational importance of contract packaging to meet peaks in demand, our next step here will be to present the pain points that you face in this process. The first and foremost point of concern during such peaks would be of cost and quality. Buyers and suppliers need to focus most upon cost due to the fact that they have to add these costs of service into the final product cost. From a quality perspective, buyers such as consumer packaged goods majors have internal quality levels which need to be met before product goes out into the market. This becomes a major point of concern when opting for a contract packager. Maintaining proper inventory levels and lead times is the second most important pain point when it comes to handling peak season packaging outsourcing. Costs related to inventory levels are directly proportional to costs incurred over the packaging life cycle, which make it important to handle inventory very carefully. Buyers also need to focus more upon identifying contract packagers who are flexible in their run times and can meet any suppliers that the market throws at them. Same can be said about the problems that come with peak season demand, that is, the customized nature of packaging required. Ishpreet, are there any other points which you would like to put forward?
I think, Abhiraj, that you've brought out two critical pain point areas, although there would be a few other important areas that I would like to highlight. The first and foremost being seasonal barriers and road congestion. We all understand that infrastructure is one of the most important parameters during festive season or major events like Olympics and World Cup. London Olympics 2012 saw 11 million visitors. It was also expected that traveling would take 20% longer on an average and road congestion would be 30% higher. This makes it extremely tough to deliver and maintain lead times. Therefore, to underestimate the importance of these logistical challenges would not be right. Another challenging area that should not be underestimated would be labor issues. It is certain that during peak season demand surge, long hours, extra time, and constant efficiency levels is expected from the working force. Poor staffing for cutting cost could turn out to be a major hurdle. The third factor here would be increased SKUs. Although SKU proliferation may lead to increase in complexity and cost, segmenting demand may help cater to customers much better. Since companies want to grow, even in the challenging market dynamics, peak season could be viewed as one such opportunity that every firm would like to maximize on. An interesting example for this would be how a leading CPG company added more than 600 Olympic-themed SKUs for London 2012 Olympics. Now that would require careful planning and well-formulated strategy. Moving on, we have yet another challenge that would probably be the balancing factor for the entire process to be flawless: lack of transparency. Communication gaps between a CPG and a contract packager could lead to serious issues while handling peak season demand spurts. So I think we have covered the major challenges during the peak season for the bottleneck category. Would there be any other areas that you would like to highlight, Abhiraj?
There is one point which may be redundant in weak seasons, but may act as a pain point in peak seasons. That is, the decision for an automated or manual format of packaging. Of course, automated can be preferred, but the service costs associated will be higher. From my experience, many of the contract packages in emerging regions such as India, Brazil, depend upon contract labor and a manual process of packaging to meet peak season demand. So why is meeting peak season demand important? What can we do?
Before we move to the solution, Abhiraj, I would like to highlight that during peak seasons, companies have approximately a 2 to 10-fold increase in volumes. I think that this figure is significantly high, and when evaluated, along with the risk of potential demand shocks, it only gets important to increase the level of agility and focus on a strategy to relieve the pressure and ensure that neither your staff nor your customers feel the pinch. Well, at this stage, we have something what we call as the peel concept. The peel concept addresses necessary actions, initiatives, and factors one should keep in mind while preparing for the peak season. Let me now explain in details every aspect of the peel concept, starting from plan. Planning is essential not only for a CPG but also for contract packager who's preparing for the peak season. From a CPG standpoint, planning essentially involves two important areas of focus: demand forecast and choosing the right supplier. With respect to creating demand forecasts, one should be aware that demand forecasts for peak seasons do not mean absolute figures. Therefore, frequent updates addressing the minimum and maximum demand limits are essential. Demand forecasts are also an important aspect of planning from the point of view of a contract packaging service provider. These forecasts should now be shared with the right contract packager, which brings us to the next point. One is now forced to think, who would be the right contract packager for my requirements? How can I evaluate such a supplier? To do that, there are a few basic parameters that one could consider. The first being location. The distance of a contract packager's facility from a CPG's manufacturing location is absolutely essential, as road congestion is a major challenge when it comes to on-time delivery. The second being reliability and experience. With experience comes flexibility, something which is essential when a contract packager has to handle demand variability. Contract packagers should be able to provide flexibility for shorter run jobs in contrast to the brand owner's plants that are tuned for longer production runs. Reliability can be focused around two aspects, including constant innovations. The third would be technology and strong IT systems. Frequent machinery upgradations is absolutely essential, especially in cases when products require special packaging for special machineries for packaging. Finally, the must-haves. This could include relevant certifications, size of the company, financial strength, transparency, among other factors. Moving on to the point of view of a contract packager, we could look at clubbing these into three major steps. Step number 1 would be to plan and check for proper functioning of all equipment, repair, recharge, purchase spare parts if necessary. Perform analysis based on demand forecast to check for necessity of additional lines. Step number 2 would be to manage the labor shift details and to plan well in advance. Verifying anticipatory requirements with the temporary staffing provider in case required would be one detail that should not be missed. These temporary workers could be used for simpler assignments like bundling or kitting where skill set required is low, thus leaving the complex task to long-term personnel. The final point in the checklist that most suppliers overlook would be to explore alternate forms of delivery if available. It could be air, sea, or road, among others. A very good example here that demonstrates how planning has effectively helped in hassle-free peak season would be the performance of CDL Logistics during London 2012 Olympics. Based out of UK, they took measures to ensure timely deliveries. These included expanding the warehousing and delivery teams to ensure 24/7 fulfillment services, sourcing additional 20 vehicles, and also adopting to nighttime and weekend deliveries. These factors combined helped CDL Logistics minimize impact of road closures or traffic congestion due to 1 million visitors in London at the time of Olympics 2012. Abhiraj, now let us consider that planning has been successfully performed by both the CPG and the contract packaging provider. What would you suggest the next steps of action to be?
Now that we have understood the practices in the industry related to planning and selection of suppliers, the next step in the PEEL concept stands for engage. This part essentially deals with three questions: whom to engage, where to engage, and how to engage. Let us take this case by case. Take an instance where your internal co-packaging expertise is low. That is, there is increased variability in demand patterns and the packaging required is customized, and you don't have the required equipment. How do you meet this demand? The practice that we identified in the industry can be again divided into 4 major areas. First, outsourcing practice. For this case, major companies utilize a mixed strategy of self-packaging along with working with suppliers who can provide leased co-packaging machines in the distribution center of the buyer. Second, distance to focus markets. The distance from the market in question will be near focus markets or within focus markets for this scenario. Third, pricing basis. Time and material based pricing and value added based pricing can be the most apt options for the case in point. And finally, the fourth, suppliers. The buyer here has the flexibility to deal with local or global contract packages with facilities within the industry preferring to work with local contract packagers or local 3PL players to meet immediate demand fulfillment. For those who are wondering about embedded operations and who provides such an option, there is a supplier in the US named Coregistics. Coregistics has 6 facilities in USA and provides embedded operations to meet peak season demand. Another example for this case would be of Saddle Creek Logistics for one of their clients, Coty. Saddle Creek Logistics, from their experience, have noticed that in weak seasons or off seasons, approximately 3 million units are packaged as compared to 8 million in peak seasons such as Christmas. During this, the best practice is to increase packaging lines or embedded lines so as to meet this demand increase, which is what Saddle Creek Logistics did. The production planners in Saddle Creek Logistics worked with their Coty counterparts to decide on-hand inventory levels and inbound material flows so as to meet this demand flawlessly. Let us now take a more strategic case. Consider a scenario where a new market entry has been planned. Internal or indigenous packaging is low and operational complexities are high. In such a scenario, what we notice in the industry is that buyers go for full outsourcing within the focus markets with varied pricing options. Here, what we notice is the fact that buyers want to work with integrated contract packagers or third-party logistics providers who can provide packaging fulfillment services. Having said that, there are many ways to bring out the right option for engagement models, and each scenario may be different. This brings us to the next part of the peel concept, which is adapt. Ishpreet?
Now that we have developed successful partnerships with suppliers and clients alike, we move on to the third step of action, the A of our peel concept, where A stands for adapt. By now, you must be wondering, why would adapt be required when successful planning has already been carried out for the peak season? Not only that, supplier selection and engagement, the 2 most important steps, have also been effectively performed. What more could be done? Well, as I mentioned earlier, bottleneck category is characterized by demand variability. With the word variability in the picture, it is not just important to be proactive, but it is also important to be reactive. To add to this, clients are coming up with extremely short turnaround times, making it crucial for manufacturers to undertake initiatives and reduce the uncertainty. Thus, to be reactive, one needs to be able to adapt. And so, it is always important to have a plan B. CPG companies evaluate a number of companies while selecting the right number of supplier. As a part of this process, they could keep a list of few other contract packagers who may be able to support their partners during the peak season. Suggestions could be made to their partners or chosen suppliers to engage with other companies in case volume requirements are beyond the forecasted numbers. Many contract packagers have moved towards engaging with 3PL providers or other contract packagers to support them during the peak season. We have an example here from Crossroads Centers, transportation and warehousing provider based out of the US. They were approached by another transportation provider during the time of their peak season when they needed help for meeting the demands for multi-packs. Crossroads immediately adapted to the situation, invested in the necessary equipment along with additional personnel required for the project and completed the job ahead of their time. I think that this example clearly demonstrates how important partnerships could be to adapting to any given challenge in the peak season. Not only partnerships, but educating the partner about risk, challenges, and capabilities alike could help develop quick reactive measures to curb risk and long-term damage. Also, it is extremely important to have weekly forecasts to monitor the demand during the peak season. For one to react, understanding and recognizing the challenge would be the first step. Thus, so far with planning, engaging, and adapting, we have successfully laid out pointers and checkpoints required for smooth functioning during peak season demand spikes. But none of this would be helpful unless we learn, which brings us to the final step of the peel concept. Abhiraj, why don't you explain us how important the last step is it to the entire peel concept?
The last part of the peel concept and also the tail end of a webinar is learn. Understanding this part is fairly straightforward. However, it is most crucial. All strategies fall short if the learning from past experiences are not applied. So let me remind you all of some major events that are set to happen, which we feel will impact your decisions around contract packaging. 2014 FIFA World Cup and the 2016 Summer Olympics are set to happen in Brazil. There is an expected increase of tourist inflow of almost 2 million with a direct retail sales impact of 600 to 700 million Brazilian reals. While the slide shows what we have discussed, I would like to summarize the whole webinar. Now we have realized the importance of managing our contract packaging during retail sales spikes, which is highly influenced by such big and major events. We have also further focused upon cost and quality and ensure to manage the inventory levels. Not to miss out that lead times will be a major concern to address due to various reasons that we have discussed. Companies need to focus on peel, that is planning, engaging, adapting, and learning. That will help us to proactively manage such peaks in demand. So are we ready for it?
So this brings us to the end of the presentation. Thank you, Abhiraj and Ishpreet. It was really nice to understand the peel concept, and it's a question that we will have to ask ourselves. Are we ready to take on the events that are going to happen, and how we are going to position our contract packaging strategies? So during the course of the presentation, I had taken a note of a couple of high-frequency questions that was posed to us from the audience. So moving on to the question and answer session, I would pose these questions to our presenters one after the other. So to start off with, Abhiraj and Ishpreet, one of our audiences had asked, what would be the possible lead times for planning in peak season? So could you throw some light on that, please?
Thank you for the question, Sharan. Well, I would say the approximate lead times before the planning stage would be around 3 to 5 months ahead of peak season. As I had mentioned, during the plan stage of our peel concept, minimum and maximum forecasted demand may require availing additional capacity and may also require space in the form of warehousing. I would like to point out why this could be challenging. A recent report from UK's Warehousing Association mentioned how difficult it was to find good quality storage space. Over the past 3 years, good quality storage space has represented only around 11% of the available stock, with almost 84% of other available stock related as second class. Therefore, a 3 to 5 month buffer period would be absolutely essential and could help balance responsibility and curb future risks.
Thank you, Ishpreet. The second question that we have is, how can a contract packager help in handling peak season product returns?
Well, that is a very interesting question. Retailers and manufacturers need to have an efficient reverse logistics in place to minimize the impact of handling returns. Planning ahead for this scenario along with your contract packager or your third-party logistics provider is the best solution. Reverse logistics should be considered in the planning and the engagement stage itself. An integrated third-party logistics provider, for example DHL, can be the best solution in such a scenario. These companies, these integrated third-party logistics companies, they have easy access to labor and infrastructure. And as in the earlier question, Ishpreet mentioned warehouse spaces, etc. Having access to this makes it very easy to handle peak season returns.
Thank you, Abhiraj. That was insightful. So we have another question that goes, how much does sustainability act as an impact parameter when it comes to peak seasons?
Well, when it comes to peak season handling, and I'm going to quote a survey here. In a survey conducted by Contract Packaging Association in the 2009-2010 period, only one respondent out of the 494 surveys deemed sustainability as a factor that is important. Sustainability, I think, in peak seasons takes a back seat when it comes to packaging. However, if packaging material procurement has been properly planned and sustainability has been taken into account, the targets can be achieved. Also, if the client has internal sustainability standards set, then there will be very little option for contract packagers or third-party logistics providers or service providers, but to plan ahead and engage accordingly.
Thank you, Abhiraj. Apart from these, we also have some more questions from our audience, and we feel that we would need to provide you a detailed explanation, and we will ensure to address these questions through email, and the presenters will send across the answers to the respective questions that we have from our audience. So this wraps up our presentation for today and the webinar. We will close for now, and until we meet next time, bye for now. Thanks.